the Vatican alien agenda is probably my most important work. In fact, it's done in collaboration with the Italian CUN, which is the Centro Ufologico Nazionale. In fact, here you can see at the opening, it's dedicated to Roberto Pinotti. Roberto Pinotti is one of the most known ufologists in the world, with over 60 years in the field, a past also as a military working within NATO, and direct experiences also that involve them with encounters and so on. But he is mostly known for having founded one of the most scientifically rigorous groups in the world.
Welcome back, everybody. We are happy to have our brother Leo Zagami back, Confessions of an Illuminati. Leo, hi, friend.
Great to see you again. I see that you always have the usual mysterious background that we will fill up with a lot of interesting stuff today for your viewers.
Yeah, definitely. And like he was saying offline, we're listening to volume 1 of the Illuminati Confessions. Why don't you take people back to where this all began in your new book that you're working on?
Well, the new book is out, is already in the chart, is working out very well. It's actually the second book of this new series. I did, as you know, the Illuminati series. I ended with volume 12, which was dedicated to the Jesuits. Then I started a new series with the rise and fall of Frankist monster, dedicated to Jeffrey Epstein, which is a part of this new series where basically I expand on topics I might have touched within my Confession series. The Confession series is inspired by my long work, which started 20 years ago online, when I started to reveal my own direct involvement with the New World Order and the Illuminati. And then later on, I started publishing books in Japan. Then I started also in 2012 to publish them in Italy. That didn't really go down very well with the Vatican, who initially tried to corrupt me and stop me from continuing in my mission. But I persisted, and it became actually a bestseller. The one that you showed me there is a book that has been published in several languages, even Bulgarian, and it has even been published in Africa, in Nigeria. So there has been a lot of versions of that specific book, which is Confessions of an Illuminati Volume 1, which for me is it's my first book of the series. And it wasn't really the first book in the English language, because when we agreed for a 5-book deal with my previous publisher, Brad Olson, CCCC Publishing, he wanted to start with Pope Francis, the Last Pope, which was then my first essay in the English language. And so, of course, as you know, my background is within secret societies, but also connected to the Vatican. And for that reason, I decided to then expand with an almost 500 pages book. 500 is actually 443, I think, in the paperback version, which expands on the secrets of the Vatican's secret alien agenda, basically. The Vatican alien agenda is probably my most important work. In fact, it's done in collaboration with the Italian CUN, which is the Centro Ufologico Nazionale. In fact, here you can see at the opening, it's dedicated to Roberto Pinotti. Roberto Pinotti is one of the most known ufologists in the world, with over 60 years in the field, a past also as a military working within NATO, and direct experiences also that involve them with encounters and so on. But he is mostly known for having founded one of the most scientifically rigorous groups in the world. And then he was also invited to speak in the Vatican, because the Vatican started in 2002 to do conferences on UFOs, UAPs as they call them now, aliens and so on. And so his organization joined CIFAS, which is another organization that started in 2002 with Alfredo Magenta to do these conferences in the Saint Gate Church, which is in Vatican territory, just in front of the entrance where you enter to go to the secret Vatican archives. What used to be called the secret Vatican archive now is called the Vatican Apostolic Libraries. Vatican Apostolic Archive. And then you have the Vatican Apostolic Library, which is another reality. These realities are very difficult to access for people who don't have any connections, even for academics. And imagine there is 53 miles under the ground of archives under the Vatican, filled with mysteries regarding also the UFO, UAP, as you call them, and all the various cases for the beatification, the sanctifications of saints often involve paranormal phenomena. So the book which I made in collaboration with Roberto Pinotti is very important because he gave me access also to documents that, and then on top of that, also Alfredo Lissoni, who is a professor of religion, who had the privilege to access the secret Vatican archives a few decades in the early 2000s.
Wow.
So thanks to all the material that they gave me, and that was never released in the English language, because they have published, for example, Pinotti has published this book in Italian, UFO in the Vatican. Then you have Sony, who published another book regarding the UFOs in the Vatican archives, but nothing really came out ever in the English language. So I convinced them to collaborate with me to this project, a project which by definition is a collaboration when you have other people involved. But of course, I'm the writer and I have put together the whole thing. But I'm very honored to have had the possibility, because in the year 2000, Pinotti was the first one to actually bring to light the documentation regarding the first UFO crash, which happened 14 years before Roswell in Magenta, northern Italy, which was then classified by the Mussolini authorities. And in the end of the 1990s, early 2000s, this mysterious source started to send the documents to Pinotti, to this other guy called Alfredo Lissoni, and then to also another guy called Bongiovanni separately, to test the ground. We didn't know who this source was, okay? It ended up being the grandson of Benito Mussolini, whose father had been killed by Mussolini because he betrayed him. Galeazzo Ciano was the father, and he is a guy who now is no longer with us, so we can actually tell his name and even show his pic on my book. But of course, before he was only a secret source, provided a lot of important documents, which of course are also partly included in my book, which I have here. Documents that prove that reverse engineering started in 1933, after Mussolini recovered this UFO. And this UFO, of course, was then also analyzed by both the Italians as well as the Germans. They was allies in the war. And it could have actually changed the course of the war if it wasn't for the intervention of Pope Pius XII, because Mussolini created a special unit known as RS-33, which is a unit dedicated to reverse engineering. That's why people think when this document started to filter through the internet that RS-33 is because of 1933, the date of the crash. That's not really the case. It's an archive number for the archives in Milan dedicated to the reverse engineering. At the time, Italy was not a republic, it was a kingdom. And the documents that we have, of course, are from the Kingdom of Italy, and they are also from the fascist secret police of Benito Mussolini, who immediately declared the whole thing, top secret, threatened the press, threatened everybody, retrieved the craft. But like I said, that craft eventually would not really benefit the Germans or the Italians, but rather the Allies, because then the Pope gave it to the Americans. And in 2023, David Grush talked about it in front of the Congress committee. So that's when, for the first time, the American audience heard about this event. And this is only one of the many, many stories in this book. It's just, that is filled with things that, of course, pertain to the Vatican. This is the Zacharias teaching with Corrado Balducci, who then is here with the guy who collaborated for me with the book to do this book. And then I have also other important testimonies, because then in this book I also talk about the remote viewing divisions in America, in Russia, in China, and their involvement after with the reverse engineering projects that were started.
They do remote viewing at the Robert Malone Institute, right? Robert Malone.
Well, we can say that remote viewing started at the Stanford Research Institute. That is the mother of all research regarding because one of the main people involved with this research is Dr. Al Puthoff. And then so this is a little bit, in my book, I wrote this book to bring to the American, but also to the English-speaking audience in general, material that wasn't available in their language. And I think that it's already being highly appreciated. It's already entered the charts. It's one of the #1 books today in the UFO chart on Amazon. And it's already competing with all the big ones that we already know. But my intention is not to just bring you these topics, but also bring you the cover-up and the disclosure agenda of the Vatican, which means the complete control of every single so-called disclosure advocate you see on TV these days, because they are all controlled, from David Grush to Elizondo, whose lawyer is Daniel Sheehan, who is a former Jesuit novitiate, to everybody else who is involved in the UFO scene, who is controlled. And
David Icke too?
No. David, no, absolutely. David is actually a person, a very genuine person. And I think for that reason, sometimes he has had some problems. That's why I'm trying to help him. I'm actually working with the Iconic this week on a special dedicated to my book.
What would you say about Aleister Crowley's quote, that aliens and demons, call them angels now, but they have a different word for them? Would you say that that's valid, or because there's actual ships? So what would you say he conjured that day? Was it an actual alien, or was it like a demon, or what?
Well, we know, for example, that then, I have already touched on that subject in Invisible Master, my book that you might know about, which was the first attempt to introduce this topic in a different way to the American audience. You see, this is my second book really on the, let's say, UFO, alien, UAP, whatever you want to call it, topic. The first one was Invisible Master. Invisible Master was published in Italy, was published in Japan. And in Japan, actually, with the collaboration of Alia Manucci, who is a very famous actor, by the way, is the guy you see in that film, The Wolverine, the Immortal. He's the Japanese that after the Hiroshima bombing is in that bed. That is the actor is the guy who actually co-wrote the Japanese version of Invisible Master Whip. So it actually was very successful also in Japan. Invisible Master touched very much on the occult aspect, Aleister Crowley, the whole link with the theosophy to ufology, the Rosicrucians. And at the end, I got inspired to do that book because you remember in not 10 years ago, but 9 years ago, in 2017, we had the first TikTok video that came out like, a genie out of the bottle. And then at that point, suddenly you had people like Luis Elizondo appearing on the scene and all this military, which already started to appear, if you think about it. This kind of more scientific or military whistleblowers started to gradually appear from the 1990s, becoming more and more vocal. In reality, it was all tested, and it was all gradually manifesting in a very calculated way. So when I heard that they were starting that, I said, okay, I'm going to, publish the English version of Invisible Master. But then once I arrived here in America, and I arrived here in Palm Springs where they do Contact in the Desert. So I ended up 2 days after I arrived in the middle of Contact in the Desert, in the middle of the action, let's say, with all these people from the various, it is the biggest UFO conference in the United States. So you have everybody there, but you have also a lot of manipulation, a lot of gatekeepers, Nowadays, in fact, it's been completely taken over. But the interesting thing is that when I arrived there, after I saw what was going on, my publisher, brother, also said, no, you come here. It's, be well received. And of course, I had people who interviewed me. I met a few famous people from the various history channels and so on. But then I was like, somebody's behind all this. And I want to understand who it is. I want to bring it to light. And it took me 7 years to get every single name and their links to the Vatican. And the most crazy thing was that in the end, this year, if you go and check on the Contact in the Desert YouTube channel in that visible video, there is, usually you have to go on the website and the paying section. But if you go actually on the one that is published on YouTube, you will find the video of a guy called Daniel Sheeran. Have you ever heard of him? Okay, the guy is a attorney, but he used to be a Jesuit novitiate. He worked as a legal representative for the Jesuit headquarters for 10 years. And he is a ufologist, and he's the lawyer of Luis Elizondo, Stephen Greer. And he is the one that controls the whole ufologic movement. And the crazy thing is that this year he admitted it in front of the cameras there, in front of Contact. I didn't go because they invited me. I said, no, I want to go. The people I'm actually about to expose. I didn't think that was coherent with my work. But he said at one point, they asked him, so what about the Vatican? And he said, Pope Leo XIV has invited me to go to Castel Gandolfo. And that is all about this book, which brings out the connection between Pope Leo XIV, Castel Gandolfo, the previous Pope, also Pope Francis, who had closed Castel Gandolfo, which used to be the summer residence. But these days, the Pope lives more there than in the Vatican. And why is that? Because that's the headquarters of the astronomical center, where you have direct connection with Mount Graham telescopes and all the other telescopes around the world, NASA, everybody's all connected there. So the Pope now getting ready for disclosure, and in my book I reveal all the background of all the people involved in this whole thing, with direct testimonies from inside the Vatican. So it is a very explosive book when you have access. And I'm going to show you just one pic so you understand. Okay. This photo might not say anything to you, but that is the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Parolin. And the guy next to him is the Vice President of the Academy of the Illuminati, Pier Giorgio Bassi, who is also connected to John Podesta, who is also connected to Tom DeLonge, who is also connected to the whole thing.
Wow.
And then you have this guy, you see, with all the medals and everything, who got involved in the 1950s with George Adamski. And he was the guy who started the exopolitical Vatican movement after, in 1954, and this is a photo that you've never seen before, get ready, the UFOs arrived over the Vatican. But this book has much more than that.
I'm buying.
This book is like, when you see some of the stuff, you'll be like, what the heck is this? I had forensic experts, though, for some of the stuff, because it's pretty unbelievable what I'm about to show, so get ready, yeah? Don't get scared.
That looks like lamb that Aleister Crowley drew.
Is a skull of the, inside the Vatican secret archive. They dig this out.
Wow.
So, any questions?
Yeah, like, I've heard stories that there's like 32 craters on the moon named after Jesuits. Is that true? And who are the Jesuit astronomers and stargazers?
Great question. The guy who, in fact, was very much involved with starting this whole trend, also involved directly with SETI, was Father Coyne. Father Coyne was the head of the Specula Vaticana, and he was also a professor. He's the guy who forced the Indians out of Mount Graham to build the observatory.
Wow.
He is the one, because then the observatory then built the infrared telescope with a consortium called Lucifer, which now is called Lucy, and then there is Lucy 1 and Lucy 2. And so it's very interesting what happened with this whole story, but we can say that Father Coyne is the instigator. Then the idea that the Vatican had since the 1950s is to baptize an extraterrestrial. This is Jesuits.
What? That is crazy.
Wow. You ever heard of Diana Pasulka?
No, never.
Pasulka is a professor of religious studies who is one of the few people, is a gatekeeper. She was enrolled by Jacques Vallée, and then she ended up inside the Vatican archives, and then she ended up meeting this guy who is a brother Consolmagno from the Jesuits, who used to be the head until last year. Now he's the head of the foundation. And then she managed to access the archives also with a guy called Tyler. She doesn't reveal the names initially, but then the name is revealed in my book. He is a scientist who worked for 25 times on the launch of the space shuttle. And together they went under the archives to dig up the secrets of the UFOs also. But then she was blindfolded in New Mexico, brought to a crash retrieval site. And this is not stuff that is from, some ufologic enthusiast. She's a professor linked to Gary Nolan, who is another big shot at Stanford, linked to Hal Puthoff, who is mega big shot because he was involved with the program that then you see in the movie, The Man Who Stared at Ghosts. Because that is the key. That movie is the key to understand Project Stargate, which is very important in our story. And then Project Stargate is connected to the University of the Lateranense University and the Gregoriana in Rome, where you had a guy called Father Resch, who died just earlier this year, who was the head of the paranormology department for the Vatican, who instructed the priests on how to deal with aliens. And I have all of this with documents, so it's like people can then go and check for themselves. I have declassified CIA documents also that confirmed all this, so you can go and check for yourself. Problem is that nobody knows about these things. So they don't know, even when the documents are declassified, where to go and look for. Okay. But definitely we're talking about Uri Geller's involvement and all kinds of things that are very interesting, I think.
What is the Vatican's role in this, like in disclosure? And do any of the other religions have a role in it also, like Muslims or Christians?
Okay. Let's be very clear. Once any kind, first of all, you asked me earlier one important question. Are they demonic? Of course, there is a demonic aliens. There is fallen angels. There is the spirit of the Nephilim. There is all kinds of realities that manifest interdimensionally, extradimensionally, and extraterrestrials. Now, on the contrary of what Jacques Vallée says, Jacques Vallée takes a position which is one excludes the other. He was for the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and suddenly he goes for the interdimensional. If you go on the movie Contact, these two things don't exclude the other. Contact, written by Carl Sagan, who himself was involved in the early 70s with a bunch of religious people who, of course, were involved with SETI. SETI had on his board Father Coyne, the one I showed you earlier. And almost every single director of the Vatican Astronomic, of the Specula Vaticana, as they call it, which is the Vatican Astronomy sector, is involved with SETI, which is, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. In my book, I explain how SETI was inspired and some very interesting stories that very few people know and their connections to the Vatican. So then once you have a complete idea, you see, in the early 50s, this starts because the Vatican got involved with the UFO crash of Mussolini. Then the same Pope that got involved with it had himself a encounter of the second kind. And then the Pope that followed in 1961, the guy who actually started the Second Vatican Council, in Castel Gandolfo had an encounter of the third kind. So the encounter of the second kind, which is, viewing the UFO. But then there was a Pope, John the 23rd, that after connecting with this non-human intelligence, and I explain in my book, thanks to the testimony of a P2 member, the P2 Lodge. Have you ever heard of that? If we had it's very. I think you should study volume 1 for that, the one that you are actually stepping to, so you can have a clear idea of what it is. A very powerful lodge of Freemasons who was involved with the Vatican and the CIA. The CIA during the Cold War gave $10 million a month to this lodge for stay-behind operations connected to Gladio.
Yeah, Gladio.
So Gladio was, of course, part of it. Because then you have to understand, once you see the Germans, the Italians lose the war, automatically the Russians and the Americans take over their technological sector.
Yeah. So with the Jesuits, they are like a sun worship people, right? They worship the sun and the moon. What are like the rituals that they do?
Here it's very important to understand. You have, first of all, the rituals connect, like I wrote in my Invisible Master, the rituals are there when you are opening a time interdimensional gates. You are connecting with these beings. So you get to what is the second kind encounter. In the second kind encounter, it's unlike a simple sighting because you are also left something behind, which is physical, environmental, physiological at times, evidence. Like the Pope that had the encounter of the second kind, he saw it in the sky and equiparated it to the miracle of Fatima. It's true that the first kind is like you don't have any physical traces or environmental disturbances. You simply have a temporary something, light in the sky, but that doesn't really mark the level of the second kind, which is much more strong. And then, of course, the third kind is when you have direct contact with the being or maybe the orbs that are also used by the motherships.
So what do you think the disclosure happens right now, like say today? How do you think the perception will be with the American people or with people around the world in general? Do you think it'll be something like the Independence Day where...
That is the interesting thing. In my book, I dedicate a whole chapter to 2 surveys that were conducted. And the people who conducted them are also very interesting because the first people to conduct this kind of survey were, in reality, was mainly Victoria Alexander. But I don't know if you ever heard of John B. Alexander. He is another of the people who was in the Man of State of Goats, involved in that in the real Stargate program. And he was also a guy I talked about in volume 8 of my Confessions, involved with Michael Aquino, the Temple of Sect. The Alexanders, thanks to, Robert Bigelow, of course, the billionaire, he financed this survey to understand how every single section of the population will react relating to their own religion. So how a Jew will react, how a Catholic will react, an evangelic will react, how mainstream evangelic rather than some other kind of evangelic, Orthodox, Buddhist, Islamic people, they have different ways of reacting. But in the end, they came out that you have to understand, first of all, there is only 2 surveys of this kind. One was conducted in the 90s. The last one was conducted in 2008 by a Lutheran reverend who is also a member of MUFON, and Reverend Peter. So there is these two services that really function as how they will react. So you go there and you actually read in my book, you can see how they have replied, the percentage, the exact questions that they were given. I can give you an example if you want, in regards to, but it is, of course, something that I think will help a lot of people understanding, the various nuances. Like, for example, the 11 statements given from the Alexander survey, they were basically out of, I can tell you that it consisted of 11 answers and, the question and answers. And so the first one was the official confirmation of the discovery of an advanced technological superior extraterrestrial civilization will have severe negative effects on the country's moral and religious foundations. And then the answer in the various categories. And they came to the conclusion that the Americans were strong enough to take it without going in a complete state of chaos. However, there is been people who have contradicted this survey, like Jacques Vallée, for example. But there is also people who have said that the faith, people who are well grounded in faith, will have no problem in accepting this reality and then, of course, link it to their own belief system. Now, people say that they have problems in going to see Disclosure Day of Steven Spielberg because that might jeopardize their faith. Well, if their faith is so fragile to be attacked by watching Steven Spielberg movie, then they're idiots. Sorry. That's, how can I say? I think that somebody who has faith in God, faith in Jesus, or faith in whatever faith they have, and they are, suddenly taken over by a movie, it means that they don't have the strength. Spielberg is, hinting on the fact that his movie will change the belief and people will see things, it's entertainment. It's a movie. However, be very careful. This movie behind this movie, there is the Vatican. I don't know if you saw this movie, and I want to spoil it for you, but one of the protagonists is a former nun. The screenplay is written by a Catholic who helped Steven Spielberg, and it's fueled with Catholic imagery, nuns, stuff. So I don't want to spoil it for you because, of course, let's go and see it after reading maybe my book, and you can have a full idea.
I'm actually going to buy the book, and if we finish up later on.
I tell you, for me, it was important. I wrote this book. I worked on this book for 6 months, and I had access, I'm not going to say how, to the script of Spielberg. So I was preparing, and in fact, the first chapter is basically debunking the psyop created by Steven Spielberg.
So when the Disclosure Day does come, do you think it's going to be like millions of them or just few? If they disclose.
Okay, first of all, the aliens is not they are arriving. They're always been here. There's nothing to disclose at the upper level. In fact, they're not going to give you full disclosure because all the technology that you're using is reverse engineered from those UFO crashes. So there is a special program called the Legacy Program, and the Legacy Program is the one that has been controlling all this. And they work with the Department of Energy, which is inheriting what the Manhattan Project put together. And that's why New Mexico has always been at the center of all this. And I'm not talking only Roswell. Huh?
That's fascinating. So everything that's going on, like with all these data center buildup and all this stuff going on with...
It's written all here. You have the data center, everything. But I'm not going to, unveil too much, otherwise you're not going to be shocked when you read it. But you have documents and stuff. And when you're going to read it, you're going to say, okay, now finally I get it. It's all part of the same plan.
Huh. There's another book that I want to read that is on my list to buy, but I'll probably buy with the other book today. It's here, chapter 8 or 7 about the Muslims and the Shias, how they're protected by the Templars. Like that.
Well, as you know, I published, yes, the Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 10. It's, I think, very important book. It actually received praises from the Islamic community. I was quite surprised by that. But it is a book which explains how the secret societies have operated for a very long time and what is really the birthplace of our civilization. And so when Islam came along, it simply didn't wipe out all of it. Those Illuminati who were there, stayed there in Sumeria, or all the lands that now are Syria, Iraq, Iran, became the base for secret societies, especially within the Shia tradition, which was a minority tradition of Islam. When Sunni started to take over the show, they needed secret societies, but also they needed secret societies because the Shia tradition created Sufism, and Sufism was based often on material that would not have been accepted by mainstream Islam. Gnosticism, Manichaeism, Zoroastrianism. And so this is, of course, the part of the fact. And then when that secret society of the Assassins was created from a branch of Shia Islam and the Fatimids in Cairo, and then branched out in those mountain tops where they hid, and they had the man of the mountain, the holy man of the mountain, Hashan Isabah, they became the killers for the Knights Templars who wanted to assassinate members of the Sunni clergy or the Sunni military. Now, if the Vatican, because the Templars were part of the Vatican, will openly kill these people, the Pope killing religious leaders or killing, it will have been a scandal. But that's why they needed some assassins. Now, because the Shia were against the Sunni, they had the same enemy with the Vatican. Templars then recruited the Assassins for their dirty work. But at the same time, the Shia, the Assassins, which by the way is a specific branch of Shia Islam, they also had the idea that using drugs for the initiation will open up to new possibilities of programming these assassins. And when the Vatican was seeing the development of these secret societies and these knighthoods, especially protecting the holy places, then that's when it clicked. And they started the Crusades, and before that they inaugurated their own knighthoods, their own secret society, their own, group of, because they saw as an example of what so it's paradoxical, because then the Crusades went against Islam, but the Crusades will not have been activated without the Catholics seeing the Sunni threat. You see, before the Sunni came along, and the first Sunni to expand were the Seljuk Turks. The Seljuk Turks that then later on will become eventually the ones that, Sunni Islam will then take over Turkey. And Turkey will no longer be a Christian place. Constantinople became Istanbul. Everything suddenly changed. The interesting, but it's very, very good to understand from a historic point of view that when the Fatimids, who preceded in Egypt, for example, the Sunni, they didn't have any problem with the Vatican. They were Shia. They had, no problem with, and they actually were running the show in Sicily. They had an emirate in Sicily. So Sicily was actually, nowadays part of Italy. But my name, Zagami, is Han. I come from there, and I actually have ancestors that come from Iran that went into Sicily.
Wow.
So, and then they created what is known as the mafia. That was actually a name for a specific tribe out of Palermo and a group of people that then became, you see, when the mafia goes and knocks on your door and says, you have to pay for staying open. That was how they started their operations. This I give you my protection on this shop. That is actually a Muslim tradition, which they elaborated in this way. You are Christian, you are Jew, you have to pay if you want to stay Christian and Jew. We have no beef with you. You are in the Holy Book, in the Quran, we have no beef, but you have to pay tax. And that became like the extortion racket of the future mafia idea. Now I will extort you because you don't. But it worked out. Then, of course, my ancestors, I was also descendant from my mother's side, from the Normans, the Germans that liberated Sicily. The Normans came from the north, and with Frederick II, they were the mentors of Frederick II, my ancestors, the Baron de Gregorio. They liberated Sicily from the Muslims, but it wasn't like a rough liberation. I have actually paintings in my home in Italy, and these paintings are very civil. You have these Muslim-looking dudes with the keys of the city, giving them to the Normans arriving there, and then suddenly the mosque was transformed in church.
Wow.
So they did the opposite of what they did in Turkey. In Turkey, they transformed the Hagia Sophia of today, the church, into a mosque. Instead, there they did the reverse. And that's why Sicily is very Catholic, with those women dressed in black, just like the Shia Muslim. Same kind of concept, same kind of fundamentalist way of approaching the faith, even if they changed completely their faith because they went from Shia to Catholicism. But their approach is very similar if you think about it.
Huh. Kind of like a babushka, huh? How they wear the garb.
Yeah, the south of Italy, all in black. If you think about it, the Shia were all black in Iran.
That is,
So it's this connection, no? But I think that it's important to understand that today we have a society in Italy which is actually under threat by the Muslim invasion once again, but it's not the same kind of invasion. The invasion of before was aggressive. They came into your land with the swords and they had to fight them out. And in the end, my ancestors managed to stop them. In Sicily, that was the border. North Africa is just a few miles down. Here, your faith doesn't pass. This is Christian territory. The same happened with the Muslim. The Turks were advancing towards Vienna. And then you had, the famous Count Dracula of the Order of the Dragon, who impaled. You had to be rather brutal to stop these people. It wasn't just a joke. And nowadays, there is not anymore. They see a society of westernized half-twits, and they send ships from Libya, from Tunisia, from all these countries, and it's a constant invasion. And they are changing radically the very nature of Europe, because you see the Illuminati, the Freemasons brainwashed the Europeans in that Western way of not having kids, of embracing from the 60s and 70s all this different culture that, you shouldn't have kids, you shouldn't dedicate yourself. Abortion became legal in Italy. It was a Catholic country. Abortion was illegal, remember that. And then at that point, you don't have any more births. So today it's automatic that it will become one day Muslim. Again, but this time they might take over the whole show. That's why the Muslims have, though, the possibility of working hand in hand with the Vatican, because the Vatican adapts. The Vatican doesn't care what is your faith. They care about having power and control.
So what's the Vatican's role in this whole population control, like no births? What's their role in that? Do they have...
Well, but no birth in what? No birth for the Europeans, but the Muslims, they have 10 kids each, and they arrive in Europe and they invade the whole thing. They calculate that the Muslims will take over Europe in 20 years, and so they already make deals in advance with the Sunnis, with the Shia. The Pope went even in the middle of the pandemic to Iraq They are creating the one world religion of the future, which I have described in volume 7 of my Confessions, because ultimately, remember that this change that the Vatican is leading because of the secret Vatican alien agenda. All the religious leaders will have to unite in their eyes under the Vatican in front of the alien revelation.
So is this war that's going on now a part of it also? The one in Israel and Iran, like where they're trying to do like a greater Israel? Is that a part of this whole alien agenda too, or is that something completely separate from this?
No, you're talking about reverse engineering. So everybody's in the three main the countries that do reverse engineering are Russia, China, and the United States. And the interests are also in the Middle East. You know, when you see, for example, Iran with the supersonic, hypersonic missiles or whatever, or you have them selling drones to Russia and Russian exchange giving them other kinds of weapons. We're talking about China and Russia trying to really weaken the United States. But it's all part of a plan behind the scenes. The only ones who know the truth are the ones who actually have contact, because there is contact that has been established in America, there is contact that has been established in Russia. Here I show, for example, in my latest book, this guy that I'm going to show you now, next to Roberto Pinotti, who is the guy who has collaborated and made my book possible. You see, this is Roberto Pinotti from before. The guy who, this is Lieutenant Colonel Savin. This is him during the Soviet Union. He's the head of all Russian remote viewers. Head who conducted and worked with the special unit, 10,003, the special remote viewing unit, and with the Sect program, which managed to have direct contact with the aliens.
I know you.
And actually, in my book, I explain, of course, all the various things that happened. And so it's very, very interesting, because there is then a connection directly with the Vatican, with Jesuits. There has been a project that is being just put on hold now because of Ukraine. The fact that they don't want to get involved giving weapons, and they are almost forced in giving something, and that is when the reverse engineering starts. But they think, the crazy thing is that since the 1950s, when they actually, 40s and even earlier, because they already started since the Mussolini thing, but at one point, we can say that the course of the war might have changed if the Pope would not have intervened. Because Guglielmo Marconi had built the death ray, and the death ray could have changed the course of the war. Thanks to the reverse engineering, he built a device that could stop all tanks, all planes, all things mechanic in motion in one. That will have changed the course of the war.
Huh. So it's kind of like a jammer, but back then, that's...
Then it was fascinating, but remember that the guy who was inventing it was also the guy who invented radio, Guglielmo Marconi. He's the inventor of radio. So,
wow. That's a lot to absorb. So, I gotta ask, what role is the new Ayatollah going to play with Pope Leo? I know Pope Leo just met with the Grand Ayatollah in Iraq, right? So what role does the new Ayatollah Musjaba have in this whole thing with the Grand Ayatollah?
The deal has already made when Pope Francis went to Iraq during the pandemic, or because that, as you know, the Shia clerics, the most holy Shia clerics, are both in Iran but also in Iraq. And so that was an important meeting. The Pope, though, there is one thing that nobody knows, that I revealed in volume 10 of my Confessions. In the last days of Iran, under the Pahlavi dynasty, they brought out all the gold of Iran and brought it to the Vatican Bank.
Huh.
And this is something that actually, I think the only one who ever mentioned this was a mafiosi who is well known here in America for making podcasts. I think it's called Sal Russo. I don't remember exactly. I think his name, who actually participated directly into the operation, recruiting some mobsters in Sicily to go to Tehran in the last days, like the moments in which it was falling apart because the whole Ayatollah regime was about to take over, and Khomeini coming back from exile because he had been, if you remember, in France for a period. And that was the moment in which all the gold was brought away. Khomeini never admitted that, because it would have brought a sense of shame on the Ayatollah. You understand? The fact that all the gold had been taken over, but they put it into the Vatican Bank. Now, the only ones who know this are the Vatican Bank, of course, and the Grand Lodge of Iran in Exile. I don't know if you ever heard of them. The Grand Lodge of Freemasons of Iran in Exile. All the Freemasons in Iran, before being, they had the threat of being killed by the Shia Republic that was about to shape up in Iran, they left Iran and they came here to America. They then went to Washington and they asked if they could start their own Freemasonry here in America in exile. And so they did. And the headquarters is actually here in California, in Santa Monica.
Really? That's fun. I know we have the second biggest population of Persians outside of Iran here in California. Yeah, in LA.
But like I said earlier, I think that it would be quite shocking for the Iranians to know that the gold is no longer there. But if you go and get this book by Salvatore Russo, who used to be a known associate of the Bonanno crime family, I don't know if you ever heard of him. He does sometimes podcast interviews. He's quite public about, outspoken. He's one of those classic Italian-American old-style mobsters who likes to talk about the old days of, Marilyn Monroe, whatever, Frank Sinatra. But he's a genuine guy. And his testimony is very powerful because he basically says the Vatican called them here in America and they told them, go to Sicily, recruit 10 people and go to Tehran. And he did it. And he got all the gold out of there.
Does there have to be peace in the Middle East before any disclosure from the Vatican or anything like that? Or does it matter about the peace? There could be a war going on when they disclose all.
Well, if the war doesn't get nuclear, the moment you touch the nuclear, then there is an automatic intervention. So that is let's say there is a red line and you don't cross it. The moment you cross it, you know that you will start having that kind of intervention.
So they intervene when there's nuclear stuff.
Yeah. And that's why there is the whole thing of the legacy program is connected with the Department of Energy. And that is really the whole thing here. That's why we will never have a full disclosure. Because how are you going to have a full disclosure here? Apart from the fact that they think, another thing that I reveal in my book is very important. My latest book for those who are watching us is the Vatican Top Secret Alien Agenda. In this book, I reveal how it's not UFO crashes. These people call it gifts. So the moment in which I give you a gift is because it's a gift, they call it gifts, this side. Oh, they gave us a gift. They crashed here. Because, of course, they don't come from the other side of the universe and crash on this little planet of ours. They obviously calculated that we will reverse engineer and fall into their trap. Build everything they have built, including the data centers, and trap ourselves in this digital prison. They don't need to come with Independence Day starships. They already trapped us by giving us the possibility to reverse engineer the technology. Do you really think that they will be idiotic enough to fall into our primitive race when in 1933, Marconi and the others got hold of this first UFO before Roswell, but even in Roswell, they didn't really know what to do with it. Imagine the technology gap there was back then. It was like, what is this? What are we going to do with this? This is, technology that was too far ahead. Now, if we have artificial intelligence, it's because they gave us artificial intelligence. And that artificial intelligence is
them.
And it's basically taking over the whole show. And we have only 4 years to go.
So where do you think we would have been at had we not had the crash like that? And we didn't have any of this technology. Would we still be like this, I don't know, like it was in like 1900s? Really in the car, or like would we even do technology? Like,
I think that even without the crash, there was already contact going on. I know that for sure from what they told me about, for example, the invention of electricity. Who invented electricity?
Nikola Tesla or Edison. I know. Tesla.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. Okay. Edison was a guy who was connected with non-human intelligence to retrieve this technology. Tesla, the same. So they started to build things thanks to this non-human intelligence already. It's not like the UFO crashes have been an addition, probably an additional track. But they were already, like for example, the Edison, like when you are starting to deal with the technology, the first things that were invented were also the gramophone record, no? You see, people hear the music, they think it's, in the record. But the first use of those gramophone records, for what it was?
Johann Brahms, right? Johannes Brahms Symphony.
No, to communicate with the dead.
Oh.
In the book Invisible Master, I explained that, of course, the gifts, the so-called gifts, have accentuated this whole situation, made it worse, I guess, for us as humans to be entrapped. I think that that's obvious that we are a primitive species. Though we have some advantages if we become conscious of, here, this is the photo that I put, which is also very interesting. I don't think I have a pair of glasses, and that was me an indication. But just to let you know, okay, 1850, the Fox sisters, the birth of Spiritism. Okay, perfect. 100 years later, UFO crashes, and UFO appearing all over the place. There is a line, a connection that goes directly from there, from Allan Kardec, the birth of Spiritism, Theosophy, all the way to what follows. Modern Satanism, it's all connected. It's not like there's a constant line, a constant connection. George Adamski was himself connected to Theosophy and then founded the Royal Order of Tibet. George Adamski is the guy who, as you know, claimed to have contact with these beings. He was very famous in the 50s because of his contactism. He founded the first international organization, and in that organization, he took on board Alberto Perego, and the Vatican then received him secretly inside the Vatican. He was received by the Pope, who had the encounter of the third kind.
Wow.
So, now, the guy, Hynek, who is, of course, together with Jacques Vallée, the inspirators for the encounters of the third kind. Hynek was the head of Project Blue Book. But he was also a Rosicrucian.
Huh.
Jacques Vallée also refers to Rosicrucianism. Pope John the 23rd was initiated into Rosicrucianism and he had his first contact experience. So there is, I mean, the problem now, I think, is that we are getting some form of disclosure, but that they want to strictly control the narrative because they don't want to disclose the element that, of course, is technology. If we start to say, okay, the patents that Lockheed Martin have or that IBM have are alien, you know what that will create? What kind of problems will that create? The patents are theirs. The patents for this technology we have from Apple. Steve Jobs had to accede into this very privileged law before he could actually start building the mouse and everything else around his computer. Otherwise, he would have never developed Apple like then it became, you know. And in fact, the Wozniak who was with him for his first thing became then a Freemason later on.
Huh. That's fascinating. Yeah, I remember.
And Steve Jobs, another thing that he did that was very important, he opened himself in the same way the remote viewers opened, taking certain drugs, doing certain spiritual experiments, so he could get that technology.
He wrote about that in his biography, right? How he did all kinds of drugs.
Yeah. But people kind of like just say, okay, he's, you know, young. No, it's not so simplistic. Silicon Valley is the center of reverse engineering. In fact, who is the biggest gatekeeper of them all, who has a lot of startup companies in Silicon Valley, who is involved in ufology, who inspired Steven Spielberg? Jacques Vallée.
Huh. That's fascinating. Well, my friend, you want to tell them where they can buy your new book? Tell them about the Leo Zagami show on YouTube. And
Thank you so much for that. Me and my wife have started again together this show that I've been conducting the last few months. I left her work and collaborate with, because she collaborates with me in the editing of the book. So I let her take a break because I knew it would be a lot of work to then produce this book. You see, we really worked very much in this time frame of letting this book out in contemporary with the film of Steven Spielberg. It was intentionally done. But to do that and to get all this material together, you can imagine it took, it was an extraordinary amount of work. So if you want to find this book, you can find it on Amazon. You just put Leo Zagami, the Vatican Top Secret Alien Agenda. If you want to know a little bit more about it, you can read my latest article on leozagami.com. I regularly update the website with new articles based on my latest books. I think that after you get this book, probably you will have other questions, and maybe we can meet up again in a few months as soon as you have read this book, because the relevance of this book and the research that I have put in it, we can only scratch the surface in the in the amount of time we have, of course. And I think that once you read it, you will probably want to ask me other questions.
I'm gonna buy it today, and I look forward to reading it. And
I think that it goes well with Volume 1, because actually I referred to Volume 1 at one point here, because it gives you Volume 1. It's kind of giving you the basis, like it gives you the possibility. It's like, almost like when you purchase a computer and then you start uploading apps and things, So each new book becomes like a new app. But you have to have the computer to build that structure upon. And Volume 1 wants to be that introduction into the way this new world order, the various secret societies, this kind of reality is actually hoped and functions. And then, of course, once you know how it works, but I will suggest that along with that, you read this, because then you will have finally a look into the real manipulators of our reality. because they are literally classifying our reality. When you understand that concept, there is people who are limiting your understanding by classifying it.
That's heavy.
And the guy who is doing behind all this, one of the main guys, is this guy here. So don't forget his face. Okay? You're going to see him more and more in the next few months as the disclosure proceeds. But remember what I told you.
So I got to ask you before I let you go, are you working on another book to follow up to this book? I'm going to buy this book.
Well, there's always another book. There's a follow-up. However, this book has taken a long time to, usually I take, of course, a few years to manifest then, then have the idea, and then you have maybe 3-4 months to put it together. This one, I spent 6 months on it, which is an exceeding amount of time for me to spend on actually putting it together. After many years of research, I was lucky enough to have met Roberto Pinotti, who is himself a Freemason, but who is also somebody who has never liked the New World Order, just like me, who wanted to fight it from within, and he actually was active with me politically in Italy, because in Italy, for the first time in December 2012, we managed to get a member of parliament, 2 members of parliament, to do a special, they were proposing a law that will have functioned in the UFO research. Unfortunately, after things didn't work out, because you have to understand that when it comes down to this level of secrecy, which in NATO classification is cosmic, top secret cosmic clearance, which is like the highest level of clearance of them all. In the Vatican is known as Secretum Omega. There is very little interest for America to help Europe gather any information. Europe is seen as the people they have actually won over, because Italy and Germany are the defeating countries, and those are the leading countries of today's Europe. But they are defeated countries. When the European Union, every time they try to advance something into the research of UAP, they are immediately blocked by the Americans. No, this is classified, nothing to do with you. Your level, even in NATO, is under us. Just suck it up. And so they don't have access, because the moment they will have access, that will give them access to the reverse engineering, which then is the backbone of the military industrial complex. So there is definitely a lot to say about the fact that China, Russia, and America are the main players. And that's why in this book, I specifically dedicated a chapter to Russia, one to China. And this whole competition that we've been talking about between these various countries is what is really limiting the ultimate disclosure. It's all about interest, It's not about encountering a new reality and presenting it to the world. They don't care about that. They simply care about controlling humanity. And so it's important what you said earlier, how they will react. How will humanity react by knowing more? But at the moment, there is only two possibilities they will know more. One is by a direct extraterrestrial intervention in a human affairs that is visible, like sudden Independence Day kind of scenario, or something that is visible, like an alien coming in front of the White House lawn, that kind of thing. But the other possibility is instead the Steven Spielberg way, that suddenly these things will be revealed to us on TV and on the, with the big disclosure. But that is, of course, something that will be manipulated by the governments of Earth on their own, with their own agenda. Steven Spielberg has his own agenda because he's connected to the military-industrial complex, regardless of what he says. So I hope that today's show has opened the mind of a lot of people that this disclosure that we are being served now is a soft disclosure. It might get, of course, more dramatic, but you will never have the full serving because it will disclose things that have to do with national security.
My friend, we appreciate you coming on. We appreciate the time you gave us. We look forward to having you back in the book and talking about this book and talking about everything we just covered, but in more detail.
Absolutely, because at that point you will be able to give me also some appropriate, you always give me some great questions, and I must say that you're a great host. But in this case, you need to really, pinpoint maybe the various elements of interest, so then you can highlight them at the next interview, and maybe we can go even more into depth. Okay. Take care, guys. God bless both.
Bye. We'd like to give a big thanks to Leo and for everyone. We're our passion and knowledge with you all. It means the world. If you guys enjoyed this podcast with Leo Zagami, you can check us out on Spotify, Substack, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you find podcasts. You can find us on any social media. Piggo's Trading Desk on X is Piggo's_T_desk. And you can check us out on Amazon. We have free books. We have The United States of America, Sovereignty of Nations, and Piggo Multi. So check us out. Look at our articles. Leave a review on our articles if you guys like. No one ever leaves any comments, and we look for feedback or whatever. You leave a comment on channel right here on YouTube or on Spotify.
I'm actually buying the book right now. So check out Leo Zagami's work on Amazon. Go on leozagami.com. Check him out on YouTube, Leo Zagami Joe. He did a good episode yesterday with his wife. I watched that one, and I watch pretty much every episode he puts out. But the one yesterday actually goes into the book. And then we hope you enjoyed the episode today. We learned a lot. It was incredible. Thank you, Leo, and thank you, everybody. If you made it this far, we appreciate it.
Thank you.